for you.
Okay. All right, we're at 7 o'clock, so I'll call the meeting to order. We have to make a couple changes to the agenda, as those of you who are on might have heard us talking about. So the first is we're going to add an executive session. We have the need for an executive session for a contract-related issue, and that we will put after transact other legal business at the end of the meeting. And then are we removing the ballot? Is that what we're removing?
Yes, that is correct, because the ballot will need to have folks who are interested in the elected officer positions. So the ballot will have to be developed later after the 25th of January, and we can approve it at that point.
Okay, so we're going to remove item number 6 then from the agenda for the reasons that Dave just stated. George.
On the ballot issue, had you given a thought that you might need to put in a space for write-in candidate?
Indeed, I have, and so we can get to that when we get to that part of the action, George. But yes, we've given that thought.
Okay, so is everyone good with the agenda as we've amended it? Give me a thumbs up. Okay. We'll move on then to public input and announcements. And I understand that, Gail, are you the anonymous person that's on video? And did you want to speak? Go ahead. Whoever anonymous is listed as anonymous. We're not hearing you if you're speaking.
That person is still muted, is what it's showing on my screen.
Okay, so you have to click the little microphone to unmute yourself. Are you able to do that? Do we know, and do we know if that is Gail? We don't know. Okay. So we can't hear you. What we can do is circle back. Actually, can you type into the chat part of the meeting and let us know if you're having problems, and then we can circle back? Okay. Well, I know that a hand is raised from that video. So what we'll do is we'll circle back, and maybe Anne, can you try behind the scenes to see if you can connect with whoever that is? Because obviously they'd like to speak to us, and we'd just like to be able to hear them. Okay, so in the interim, we'll circle back to that. Oh, okay, never mind. It's for those who are listening and might not see that chat, it is one of our town clerks, and she's just saying that she didn't intend to speak, but she's not sure how to unmute. So it's a little microphone. There should be, if you pull up the bottom, there's a microphone, the hang up in the video, and the microphone would have a slash through it. So you need to just click on that to unmute. Okay, so then, or Control D, yes. Thanks, Maria. Okay, so we haven't heard from anyone else, so we're going to move on then. I don't think we have any announcements. So we're going to go to item 4, which is the annual meeting and election process. So Dave, do you want to take over for that? Yes. As to what we need to talk about?
Yes, happy to, Tammy. Thank you. And for the board, I will share my screen momentarily, have a couple documents for you, actually a single document for you to look at that has several pieces of information, but I just want to share it publicly as well. So please bear with me for the moment. And as I'm doing that, I do want to point out that our district clerk, Heather Kent, is with us this evening. I asked her if she was interested in joining us just to, just be here for this conversation, thought that was worthwhile. And And we appreciate Heather stepping in to fill that position for us. Again, I apologize. Give me just a moment. Okay, I'm hoping you can see my screen, and I'm hoping that you can see the writing clearly on it. Can someone give me a thumbs up if it's visible, or does it need to be larger? How are we looking?
It's good. If you could
Okay.
make it a little larger, that might help people.
You bet. You bet.
Yeah,
So
that's much better.
the first item we need to attend to, and we've obviously put a lot of background work into this, spent a couple meetings talking about it. Adrian, Tammy, and I were on a webinar with the VSBA earlier today with elections officials from the state, just getting a sense on making sure that we were moving in the right direction. But the appropriate step for us for our annual meeting is that we need to hold our annual meeting on the date of February 25th and hold that as a virtual meeting, and therefore not take any voting action at that meeting, which would mean we need to move all of our action items to Australian ballot. So at the top of this page, you just can see the motion requested. And for the sake of furthering the conversation and moving on to our warning, which is premised upon this, I would invite, if anybody's interested in making that motion and taking that action, that would be fantastic.
Thank you,
I'll
John.
move.
Okay, George, and then John, if you'll second it, would that be okay? Yes. All right. So is there any discussion on the motion itself? And I can't see everybody, so you're going to have to speak up if anyone has any discussion. Okay. Hearing none, all those in favor of approving the motion to conduct all of our voting by Australian ballot for this year only, 2021 election, please, pursuant to Act 162, please give me a thumbs up or say aye.
Aye.
Excellent. Is anyone opposed? Please say no. And is anyone abstaining? Please say so. Okay, so it's unanimous, Dave. We can move on to discussing the warning now.
Very helpful. Thank you very much. If you think about the way that this plays out for us, our unified union district, which serves 4 distinct towns, has its own level of complexity, but we're nowhere near the complexity of, for example, a supervisory union that serves multiple towns with multiple different organizational structures underneath it. There are some very interesting dynamics at play in different places with figuring out how the voting process will actually work. In my interactions with town clerks last week in our community, it appears to be that each of our towns is going to be proceeding as normal in terms of the voting process, and will be following the type of approach that we are taking in terms of actual town meeting, having an informational meeting that's in a virtual realm, and then all items via Australian ballot. There is, just for your awareness, there is legislation in the pipeline. I believe it has passed the House and Senate, or I know it's passed the House. I believe it's passed on to the Senate, and I'm not sure what its status is in the Senate, but it's called H48. And that will likely allow municipalities to change their annual meeting or town meeting date if they choose to do so, and do mail-in balloting voting if they choose to do so, with reimbursement for that mail-in process. I think we all know that that is an inherently complex process to take on, not only for the towns, but certainly for a school district. So what I'm seeing in my conversations with colleagues across the state is folks are hoping that the voting process in most Vermont communities looks as close to normal as possible. And that would be our intention. We'll have our virtual meeting, everything on our ballot via Australian ballot, and have it appear as normal as possible. I will be working closely with our clerks over the next few weeks to make sure that all of our details are lined up. And if we see any curveballs emerge, either from Montpelier or locally, we'll navigate those and address them as they come up. So the next big item for us is our actual warning. So if you can see what I have here, let me just point out changes from a traditional warning, if you will. One of the first things in the top line, the legal voters of the Mill River Unified Union School District are hereby warned to meet. Usually that would say in the library at Mill River Union High School at such and such a time on such and such a date. You can see we've got our virtual setup that we are all accustomed to and tend to use. And I expect that we'll also put information out for folks that just want to watch via YouTube, but don't want to actually be a participant in the actual meeting. If you look at the articles, all of the articles have been shifted to Australian ballot. So for example, moderator, clerk, and treasurer, that would usually be a floor vote in our meeting. Article 2 would usually be a floor vote in our meeting. Article 3 would just be a presentation like it always has been, and it's worded that way. Article 4 is always an Australian ballot item. Article 5 is always an Australian ballot item. And there is one article from last year's warning that was removed, and that was Article 6, which said basically to address any other business that may come before the meeting. You know, we can't really do that in a ballot type situation. You can't have new business come up on the actual ballot. So Article 6 is removed. And then the language around the meeting being recessed to March 2nd, town meeting day, for the purpose of voting. Votes would be commingled, counted at the Mill River Union High School cafeteria following the closing of the polls. I've already started connecting with the town clerks about making sure that we have the vote counters prepared, and we will have all of the regular precautions in place to support those folks with the actual vote counting. By that, I mean, we'll require gloves for everyone's safety. Of course, we'll require masks. It would be a socially distanced process. We would do health screenings for folks when they came into the building. In case you're wondering, hey, we can't do other things in the school. We can't have meetings. We can't have town meeting. How is it that we can do the vote counting? That's because the health guidelines that we have been directed to follow do allow the use of the school building for election purposes, and it's specified that way. So the process of counting votes is permitted under the actual health guidelines that we have to follow. Another really important piece I want to point out to you, and Stan provided me this information today. We received our official ADM number today, and that number, believe it or not, had gone up by one student. But that one student did affect the numbers in Article 4. Obviously, it does not affect our overall expenditures, but it did bring our equalized pupil cost down a bit. And you'll notice this number is 0.98% lower, used to say 0.82% lower. So we did have a positive, even though it went towards the negative, we had a positive shift in the per pupil spending overall. So what you're looking at on screen is the accurate, most updated version. For Ann Dages, who knows that I had already printed off a copy of this, that copy that I printed is inaccurate because this is the more accurate version of the warning. Finally, before you get to action on this, I just wanted to point out with the ballot. Sorry, let me go a little bit further. When it comes to our Article 1 action, so moderator, clerk, and treasurer, this form is the candidate consent form. Just want you to be able to see what that looks like. This is where an individual can indicate that they are interested in running for school district moderator, clerk, or treasurer. There are no additional signatures required for a person to do such a thing. Essentially, they need to circle whichever role they are interested in. They need to return it to their municipal clerk, and they list out their name, their town of residence. And my understanding is there is some statutory language around party indication affiliation. Before I finalize this form, I'm going to do some more research to see how that applies with our 4 towns, to see if I need that piece to be on the form or not. But we'll get this out in the next day or so. Date, signature, mailing address, etc. And the due date for these will be the 25th of January, because they have to be turned in 6 Mondays prior to the election. So we'll finalize the interested parties, then we'll know what names need to be on the ballot. George, to your question, we'll also provide a place on our ballot for a write-in type scenario, and when we count the ballots, we'll need to keep track of any write-ins that emerge. We'll allow someone to write out a name and position that someone may want to write in an individual for. So on that note, really the only item that needs action is approval of our warning. And I'll pause and take questions, or just turn it back to you, Tammy, to take the motion and proceed from there.
Okay, George, go ahead.
Yes, question. Is there any provision that has happened in terms of allowing us to move to have the board chair sign for the board, or do we all have to still sign it?
Oh, in terms of the actual warning, I've heard nothing to that effect,
Yeah.
George. Later in this meeting, my request for each of the board members was going to be to see if you are able to swing by the school district offices anytime during the next 2 days, potentially during business hours, I've got several things laid out for signature purposes, including some contracts and theoretically the warning and that type of thing. So we don't have any leading that just the chair can sign the warning, George.
Okay.
Okay, John, go ahead.
I actually was wondering something about that same sort of situation. I'm wondering if a roll call, an actual roll call vote would suffice for, in place of the signatures. If each of us, signifies that we agree to it, I'm not sure if that would suffice for signatures. It might.
You know, John,
don't-
I love the idea. I don't want to say, yeah, that's legal and then be wrong. But what we could do is we could do a roll call vote. And then first thing in the morning, I can pursue that answer. And if we find that out, you know, we can eliminate that need if you wish to proceed that way. That's certainly doable.
How do folks feel about that? Again, I can't see everybody. So if anyone objects to that, let me know. How's that? Okay, does anyone else have any comment? Len, I can see you.
Hi there. Just a question in terms of getting out this notice. Does it go in the newspaper at all, or is it just electronic, or how does that work?
Do you mean the consent form for people who are interested in running for the office, or the warning itself?
Both.
Yeah, so we're required to warn publicly. We're required to warn in the paper, in the Herald for the meeting. My early plans in terms of getting the consent form out would be obviously all of our electronic means, right? We can put that on the website. We can issue by email in-house. We can use social media, etc. Plan would also be to run paper copies and deliver those to our 4 town clerk's offices so that if someone is in a clerk's office and has that interest, it's available. Happy to hear any other suggestions that folks might have about ways to get that out there, get the message out about people needing to sign up for those roles. But that was the tentative plan, Len.
Well, and I would just think about maybe a little article in the paper, and I know it costs some money, but a little blurb in the newspaper that says, if you are interested in running for either of these 3 offices, you can get a consent form at the town offices and other places. I just, living here in Clarendon and not having the benefit of front porch forum and some of the things that, you know, and I know we've talked about this and I don't know what the solution is, and someday maybe we'll figure that out. But I just think for folks here in Clarendon, the newspaper will help. Is it going to address everything? No, but it's just another thing that we can say, well, it was in the paper. And so if you don't have access to a computer, then it was in the paper. And I just think the more times we can say that we're providing that information to folks in various forms, I think we're better off.
I think that's doable, Len, and it's a great suggestion. So we'll make that happen. Thank you.
George.
Do we have interested candidates for all positions at this point?
George, my intention was tomorrow to be in contact with our current officers to check their interest first and then put the information out publicly for anyone else who may have interest as well. So in 24 hours, I'll have a much better answer to that question.
Okay.
I know that Anne had also just entered in the chat area if the board members who distribute regularly in their towns documentation for the school board would be willing to distribute those consent forms similarly. So Len, yes, and great.
Where would I pick them up? At the town hall? At the town office?
Or probably at our office, I would think. Yeah.
We
Our
need problem
office.
for you, Len.
Mhm.
Yep.
All right. Thank you.
Okay. I'd just like to redirect us to the language of the warning so that we can get that off the screen, is if there's any changes to it, if we need to make any, if everyone's pleased with the way it's worded, just so that we can see everybody. It would be an easier discussion for process after that. So does anybody have any discussion with regard to the actual wording of the warning? Okay. I don't hear anybody. So, so Dave, do you want to stop presenting that then? And this way we can get back to seeing everybody? Okay. Hi, everybody. It's nice to see you all again. So does anybody have any further discussion with regard to the process that's involved or any questions in that regard? Okay. So hearing none, what we need then is a motion to approve the warning. John, thank you for making that. George, would you second it since you've unmuted?
Yes, second.
Okay, so for purposes of what John had suggested, we'll do a roll call vote. So when I call your name, and it will be in the same order that was on the warning. So when I call your name, if you can say aye or no, and that would be helpful. So George, you're first.
Aye, yes.
Thank you. Len?
Yes.
Great. John?
Yes.
Doug?
Yes.
Thank you. Adrian's not with us, I don't think, right? No. Andy?
Yes.
Okay. Amy is not with us, correct? So then BJ?
Yes.
Okay. Liz is not with us. So Maria?
Yes.
And I'm a yes. And Heather, do you want to indicate your consent to the form of the warning verbally so that I'm sure you're going to sign it, but you and I have to sign it by law, but this way it's for the record.
Yes.
Thank you, Heather. Okay, so the warning is approved. And then we will figure out the mechanics of getting it signed by everyone. So Dave, you'll reach out to everybody and let us know when it's ready, and if that roll call was sufficient or not, we'll figure that out, you and I.
Indeed, I will. So I'll let the board know either that roll call was sufficient, and then I'll just work with Tammy and Heather. If not, I will ask everybody to make a trip by the offices at their earliest convenience, and we'll get it sorted out and prepped. This coming weekend starts the 40-day window of our 30 to 40-day time frame to get the warning out, so we're okay. We've got time to make things happen. So thank you.
Okay, George.
Just a question for Dave. If we stop by the office to sign these documents, will there be cookies involved?
George, I don't know how to answer that question. I'm not sure what kind of setup I'm walking into if I do answer that question.
Wonder if they're allowed in the building.
I just have a quick question. Are our key cards going to get us in, or will we be buzzing ourselves in?
That is a fantastic question, John. I believe the answer is that your cards are turned off at this time. So you'd want to plan to buzz in is the safest bet.
Excellent. Thank you. So then we will move on to number 7, which is George's favorite part of the meeting, transact other legal business. You could have saved your cookie question for that, George.
Well, I appreciate that, but I just wanted to get in as soon as possible on that request. Unfinished business that I have is directed to Dave. I chatted with our town clerk this morning in terms of how things were going, and she seemed to be happy with all the communications that had been happening.
Okay. Any other legal business? Len?
Just a question. All of these are going to be available on the regular voting day in terms of ballots, or are they going to be mailed out, or how is that going to work?
Yeah, so Len, our plan is that our ballot that we create will be available on the regular voting day, as it normally is how I could best describe it. So I think we do it on pink paper for any who recall that, and that allows us to commingle easily when we do our counting later. But we want it to look as normal as possible is the plan on the voting.
Okay. Anyone else have any other business or questions, comments? Okay. As we had discussed at the beginning of the meeting, we do have a need for an executive session. That executive session is related to contracts with regard to training and therefore we need two motions to go into executive session. The first would be a finding that discussion of those contract negotiations in public would put the board at a disadvantage in its contract negotiating with vendors. And would someone care to make that finding? Make that motion.
I will.
Thank you, BJ. Thank you, George, for seconding. So all those in favor of finding that entering into or discussing contract negotiations regarding training with vendors would be put the board at a disadvantage. I can't speak tonight. I apologize for that. Please give me a thumbs up. Okay. Anyone opposed? Okay. And then would someone please make the motion for us to enter into executive session for that purpose?
So moved.
Thank you, George. Is there a second to that? Thanks, John. All those in favor of moving into executive session at 7:25 for that purpose, give me a thumbs up. Okay. And Dave will be providing us with a link, correct?
Yes, so for board members, I have shared a link with you for an executive session. And with the permission of the board, I'd like to ask for Brian and Jody to join us, as well as possibly Andrew. He may be popping in from on that link when the time comes, if that's okay with the board.
Did you just mail that link?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Does anyone have any objection to that, to those individuals joining? Okay. Then I want to thank Heather for joining us tonight, and for the people who decided to step in and watch, and we appreciate them always. So we can adjourn. We don't anticipate that there will be any action taken coming out of executive session that requires us to be back in open session. So have a nice evening, everyone, and board members, we'll see you on the other side.